welcome back to the State of the Town. My name is Brian Brown, and I am the Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is very excited to bring back the State of the Town, which is a preview of the upcoming town meeting. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all, everyone in the audience and those watching at home. I have always believed that the Chamber is an excellent reflection of what's going on in Hopkinton. And I'm very happy to report that the Chamber is growing and the Chamber is energized with new events again. And I can't help but notice the same thing as I drive through Hopkinton and taking my family around all the different events. The energy is exciting and it's a great reflection of what's going on in the Chamber and what's going on in town. So with that being said, there are a lot of very important topics at this year's town meeting that are important to the economic well-being of Hopkinton, and we are excited to hear about some of those topics today from our presenters. So I get the distinct honor of introducing our presenters today, and they are Norman Khumalo, Town Manager, Dr. Carol Kavanaugh, Superintendent of Schools, and Elaine Lazarus, Assistant Town Manager. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Town Manager Norman Khumalo to come up and present. Thank you, Norman. Thank you.
I'll make this work. Good morning, everybody. I want to first of all start by thanking you for joining us, as well as inviting me to this conversation. The Chamber's efforts in organizing this event are very much appreciated. Most particularly, I'm very excited to be here with all of you. After 2 years, finally, we get to meet in person. Thank you. It's unfortunate Christine is not able to join us here. I wanted to thank her for her leadership over the past 12 months, moving the Chamber forward and getting us to this point. I also want to thank my colleagues here, Dr. Kavanaugh, as well as Elaine Lazarus, for the hard work you have put into preparing for town meeting. As you all know, our town meeting would not be possible without the effort, the very honest, hard effort by our entire staff, volunteer teams, residents, as well as the town's business community. Without your work, the journey we have all traveled together in implementing the many excellent services and programs here in Hopkinton would not be possible. Allow me to share a story from the recently concluded running of the 126th Boston Marathon. That beautiful Monday morning, I was at the starting line. Standing next to me were the parents of one of your chamber members. As they were leaving the festivities, the mother leaned over to me and said, "I have not felt American in a long time, and I'm delighted I feel American right now." As your town manager, I was very happy to hear this comment. And upon further reflection, examining what it really means for us as a community, I believe that this statement represents the state of the town of Hopkinton. Together, we do make people feel happy that they are American, while the discussions and the agenda at town meeting, especially the budget, may represent an increase in taxes or some pain for some of us. In the balance, we should feel that the town meeting agenda, as well as the budget's objectives, do add to this feeling, making people feel happy they are American. For one, at $107 million and with a tax impact of 2.9% to the average single-family home, the proposed FY23 budget is substantial. We understand that. As I said, in the balance, there's some good things about it. Firstly, I'm happy to say that the budget explicitly integrates diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in service delivery. This is a priority goal that the Select Board has set for us. For example, it includes funding for expanded library services, mental health programs, transportation for seniors, and most spectacularly, for the first time, this community is investing in a staff position to support affordable housing. Secondly, the proposed FY23 budget invests $107 million in infrastructure. Approximately $7.1 million is for general infrastructure. $2 million is for water infrastructure. And 1.5 is for climate change related infrastructure. Thirdly, the FY23 budget funds engagement and transparency. And we're doing so both in the budget itself as well as in the general town meeting articles. Allow me to shed some light on what this really means for the community. For example, we have an article that is creating a revolving fund for HCAM TV. Why does this matter to me as a town manager? Two reasons. Without a strong local media presence, our democratic project is weakened. HCAM is part of that process. There's another side to this that never gets told. Without a strong local media, our bond rating will not be AAA. Do you know why? At the time we sit down with the rating agencies, there are very few questions asked of us regarding our capital projects. The reason being, our local media plays the role of asking us the tough questions, of allowing the residents of this community to interrogate, examine, and review all our proposals. So in summary, the endorsement that we receive through that process is important for our rating process. The budget also proposed, invests $72 million to maintain current service levels and make strategic investments in service expansion and new starts to address growth. This category covers staffing. Our staffing are our public service. I always hear people saying staffing are our most important assets. I don't see it that way. I see staffing as our service delivery. And thus, we are setting aside approximately 72% of that budget to make sure that we maintain our current levels of service, and at the same time making very strategic investments in some new starts that specifically address growth. Finally, our state as a community would not be this strong and excellent were it not for our solid financial health. What does this proposed budget do, and what are we asking town meeting to approve in that regard? We are investing in other post-employment benefits. We are using free cash to support our capital program. We are protecting our reserves. If you look around, most communities, because of the pandemic, and I say this respectfully, are dipping into their reserves. We are protecting our reserves. You may also recall that the town received approximately $967,000 from the federal government under the American Rescue Plan Act, Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, in late 2021. We also received an additional $5.5 million in eligible ARP monies. We're not touching those monies. This budget is reserving those funds for a very deliberate, thoughtful process by the town that will identify the appropriate uses for those monies. I can tell you, John Westerling has made a very strong case to earmark those funds towards addressing PFAS and our connection to the MWRA. You always hear us talk about OPEP. One of the reasons why I'm singling OPEP out as one of our prudent decisions in building this proposed FY23 budget is that because of OPEP, the town continues to report a deficit in its unrestricted net position. This deficit is primarily due to the cumulative effect of non-cash employee benefit-related liabilities surrounding net pension and net OPEB liabilities. They total approximately, you didn't hear this, 58.2 million. Again, this is not a hard deficit, this is a theoretical deficit. We are obligated, based on accounting principles, to account for this liability. Having said that, let me leave you with 3 or 4 significant data points that illustrate why financially the state of the town is strong. Number 1, our total net position is fabulous. This means that the town's assets and deferred outflows of resources exceed its liabilities and deferred inflows. Every CEO, every town manager, every leader of any organization loves that data. Point. Secondly, at the close of the FY21 fiscal year, the town's government funds balance sheet represented a combined ending fund balance surplus of nearly $51 million. Thirdly, of the ending balances reported in the town's government funds balance sheet, over 12 million is identified as available for spending at the government's discretion as unassigned fund balances. Very few towns have that level of liquidity. And then finally, the town's long-term debt obligation has been coming down. It decreased nearly $8.4 million during FY21, leading to FY22. This is opening up opportunities for the community to address some of its capital needs, including Elmwood School. Therefore, against this background, if you look at the legislative agenda in the proposed budget for FY23 that will be considering a town meeting, we can suppose that Hopkinton can protect its fiscal health, invest in its infrastructure, prioritize engagement and transparency, embed DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in service delivery, and protect its resources in times of climate change. In that case, together, collectively, we will make many of our residents and those who come to play or work in Hopkinton now and in the future happy to feel American. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Khumalo. Next up, I would like to introduce Dr. Carol Kavanaugh, Superintendent of Schools. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to make a presentation to you about the sort of state of the Hopkinton Public Schools. I'm going to invite Susan Rothermick to come up and join me. She's our Director of Finance and Operations. So this morning we'll talk a little bit about where we are with the FY23 budget, but we also want to talk to you about projections maybe 5-10 years out. Norman did a beautiful job this morning teeing things up for you, because as he's talking about capital projects coming down in Hopkinton, we're here to talk about how they'll be going up in Hopkinton. So. All right, so we'll start with the FY23 budget. So each year when we talk to you about preparing our budget, you should know that, as we do this, we really do stress fiscal responsibility when we're talking to all of our directors and our building principals. If you gave them the opportunity, they would love to have it all. And so this year was a year that we really streamlined things and said, this is not a nice to have year, this is a need to have year. But doing that, we also wanted to stress that it's important to us to maintain our exceptional academic and extracurricular programs. As you know, Hopkinton has the most athletic teams in the Tri-Valley League. We offer so many extracurriculars to our kids. Our academic programs put us in the highest standings. Over on the right-hand side of that screen, you can see that Hopkinton High School was ranked 10th again this year by U.S. News and World Report. I think our new ranking should be coming out today or tomorrow. And according to Niche, the public school system overall is ranked first in Massachusetts. We offer curriculum instruction and services that meet the needs of every one of our kids. And I don't think I have to tell you that the needs of our kids are growing more disparate all the time. What we're seeing our kids present with now are behavioral issues, mental health issues, social emotional issues, and we are answering those needs as well alongside the academic needs. And we always try to support our building principals, district and school improvement plans. So as I've said, we had very few requests this year for our FTE, full-time equivalents, or the personnel that we hire in the Hopkinton Public Schools. That is 80% of our budget, people. And so this year we have broken them down for you into 4 buckets: general education, student services, English learner education, and program development and support. So the first 3 asks that you see there are our general education asks. At the Elmwood School, we have a 0.1 FTE in PE Wellness, and that's really just because of enrollment growth. So the more students who are attending Elmwood, we needed to create more sections of PE Wellness. At the middle school, we have 0.3 FTE changes. We have decreases in Mandarin, but we have increases in media literacy. And again, that's really just about the number of kids that we have and the interest that they have in terms of taking courses. and at the high school, a 0.6 FTE, and Mr. Bishop will spread that out over various sections. Again, it's about student enrollment, and in March, they start to do scheduling for the following year. It's a student-generated schedule, so what kids sign up for, that's where we put our resources. In terms of student services, this is where things are really growing for us. Last night when we were meeting with EHOP, we talked a little bit about the growth in our integrated preschool. Integrated preschool is a special education program. It's not negotiable. And what we are seeing in integrated preschool, we always had our numbers hovering around 80 students. And that would mean students who are on individualized education plans as well as their typical peers. That number is now over 100 students. And we used to have 4 classrooms in integrated preschool. Now we're up to 5 this year, and we'll have a 6th preschool classroom opening next year. So that's why you see the numbers there. We have 1.0 FTE, so we'll need to hire a teacher. We'll need to hire 2.7 paraprofessionals because they work at 0.9, 9/10 of a day. So we'll need 3 paras. And we'll also need someone, additional personnel in speech and language pathology. So that's our preschool. What you should also know about that is that they take up classrooms. So when we look at the building that we're doing at the Marathon School, we used to allocate 4 classrooms. Now we're allocating this year 5 classrooms. Next year we'll be allocating 6 classrooms to our integrated preschool. We're not sure about that bump in our students, because what's happened over the course of the pandemic is that any of those early intervention services that families would have received for their kids, those early intervention services, EI, we call them, or had to be delivered through electronic communication, which is very difficult when you're talking about such young children and their families communicating with specialists in things like OT, PT, speech and language. And so maybe in the next couple of years, when those services are back to in-person, we'll see those numbers decline, but we can't be sure of that right now. District-wide, we're looking for another full-time nurse. Our student demands have increased so much that it's not just kids falling off of jungle gyms or lost teeth anymore. Now we have students who need changes in feeding tubes. We have many more kids who are diabetic or have other more intense medical needs. And so while we have those students in our district, we also need to have a nurse that will tend to the more intense needs while another nurse is there to support her with things like jungle gyms and falling out teeth. So the next thing is a 5.0 FTE in paraprofessionals. And again, those are special education needs. They fall under student services. Those are typically non-negotiable. They are written into students' individualized education plans. And on this slide, you'll also see that we had a reduction of 0.8 for a teacher of the visually impaired. We no longer have a student in the district with that need. In terms of ESOL instruction, and I apologize that that slide is so small for you to be able to see, but I think that you're going to see some very interesting things there. If you look at the school year 2014-15, the percentage of English learners we had in our district overall was 1.4%. Today, 6.9% of our learners are English learners. That's a huge increase, going from 48 students to 281 students. If you take a look at the next box over, the number of students that we have, the percentage of our students in 2014-15 who presented with a first language other than English was at 3.2, and today that number is at 19.1%. So almost 20% of the kids attending the Hopkinton Public Schools have a first language other than English. It's pretty astronomical, I think, and you'll see that kind of enormous change. So what's actually happening is we continue to hire more and more and more teachers to deliver English learner instruction. People may wonder, why do you do that? Is it something that's required? And yes, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education requires that we provide ESOL services to all of our students who are Well, there's a WIDA test, and our kids can test anywhere between 1 and 6 in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Once they reach a certain threshold, they are exited from the program. But even if they're exited from our program, we still need to continue to monitor them, and we call them FELs, former English learners. And so every year there's work that has to be done to make sure that our kids who have exited the program are not regressing. So there's an awful lot of personnel and an awful lot of work. And, clearly there are budgetary pieces that go along with that. All right, and then lastly, just in terms of program development, district-wide, we've hired a 1.0 FTE social emotional learning director. We brought her on board this year. The work that she's doing for us is invaluable. One of the things that I think we have historically done with social emotional learning is we've done things reactively. So when we typically call that tier 2, right? So it's not the kind of thing that we give to every kid, but when a student is presenting with some kind of mental health or social problem or behavioral problem, that's when we used to act. Now what we're trying to do is something at tier 1 so that all students are getting social emotional learning curriculum at all grade levels. And if we can do that, we're hoping that that's going to mitigate our situation and bring those numbers in tier 2 and tier 3 down. At the middle school, we're looking for a 1.0 library paraprofessional. We've just done a lot of renovations in that space. We don't have a school librarian. So in order to make sure that that space can be best utilized by classroom teachers and by students throughout the day, a paraprofessional will provide supervision for our kids. And then finally, at the middle school, they just want to increase the club offerings. That's very low money. All right, and then I'll hand things over now to Mrs. Rothermick so she can talk to you about the operating budget. Thanks.
Thank you. So you can see that as a reflection of what Dr. Kavanaugh just went through, the increase for the FY23 operating budget is at 4.91%. Looking at them in separate buckets, you can see that the salary increase is 3.1 and the expense increase is 1.7. One of the things that we also do with the operating budget is we use our revolving accounts, and these are fees that are typically either student generated or from people renting the school buildings. And we use that also to offset the operating budget. During the pandemic, our revenue, for instance, building use, we did not rent the building at all. So for 2 years, we had no revenue. With our bus fees that we charged to students, many students opted out and we refunded all of the transportation fees. So there was a lot of uncertainty around these funds. So for the couple years during the pandemic, the use of the revolving funds was very much restricted. But what that has allowed us to do with FY23, now that our income seems to have normalized a little bit and our expenses seem to also have normalized, we've been able to increase our use of these funds as an offset to the FY23 budget. So looking just at the salaries, the contractual obligations represents an increase of just over a little million. And the 23 staff requests that Dr. Kavanaugh is $608,000. So what we do to really make it clear to the public is breaking these out into buckets so it's more digestible in terms of how we are looking at the budget. So again, the contractual increase for the salaries, little over 1 million. Special education that we spoke about, 328,000, and that's the 9.1 full-time equivalents. The instructional cost and the enrollment growth at 129,000 represents the 2 FTEs. And the instructional program enhancement at 123,000, which is 1 FTE, and then support at 26,000. Student services, the 9.1 FTEs, that represents the 1 teaching for preschool, the 7.7 paraprofessionals district-wide, including the preschool, the 0.2 of speech, the 1.0 of nursing, with the 0.8 TVI reduction. The instructional cost, the 2.0, that's the Elmwood 0.1, middle school 0.3, high school 0.6, and the English learner at 1.0 for teaching. The instructional program enhancements, that's the 1.0 SEL director. And the administrative support or facility enhancements is the 1.0 for the middle school library paraprofessional and the few clubs for the middle school. Going into the expenses, the expense increase is $961,000. So again, breaking this down into those same buckets, the contractual inflation and current services, we actually have a decrease of $205,000. Special education has an increase of $1,094,000, and the instructional cost enrollment growth is an increase of $73,000, again for the total increase of $961,000. So this is where you can see we have benefited from being able to increase the use of our revolving funds. For transportation, we increased the use for $150,000 for the bus fee offset. Building and grounds, we increased $150,000 of our building use and $30,000 of parking fees. And the other increases is regular education of $46,000, building and grounds at $26,000, athletics at $11,000, technology at $11,000, if I'm seeing that right, and just a few miscellaneous others. But again, with the increased use of our revolving funds, the total represented a decrease in our contracted and current services. For student services, this is where we start to see student services will always fluctuate based on student need. And for FY23, we have an increase of $1.4 million for out-of-district tuitions, $38,000 in transportation and miscellaneous other increases, offset by an increased use of circuit breaker, $358,000. So student services has gone up $1,094,000, really mostly out of this unknown increase of $1.4 million of out-of-district tuition, which is really just to service all the students of Hopkinton and meet them at where they are and meet their needs appropriately. The instructional cost and enrollment growth really is transportation. With the growth, we have added one additional bus. That's the increase of $73,000. We did not have any expense increases for program enhancements or administrative support or facilities. So when we put these together, both the salary and expenses using those same buckets, the contractual inflation and current services represents an increase of $873,000, special education of $1.4 million, instructional cost and enrollment growth of $203,000, program enhancements at $123,000, and support increase at $26,000. So for the Hopkinton Public Schools, the increase is $2.6 million for the FY23 budget. So one of the ways that districts across the Commonwealth are able to address these fluctuations in special education is by establishing a special education reserve fund. And this is specifically for these unanticipated and unbudgeted costs for out-of-district tuition, transportation, and this is in accordance with the Municipal Modernization Act. Funds may be distributed or expended from this reserve fund without further appropriation, with a vote from both the majority of the school committee and the select board. And this reserve fund really helps to smooth out the budget process so that the school budget doesn't have huge swings for something that is really unforeseen, and it can really normalize the school's operating budget when you have this reserve fund to fall back on. So what you will see in the warrant for the town meeting is actually splitting out this increase for special education. So the increase for the Hopkinton Public Schools budget will be the 2.88, and we have sectioned off this increase for special education of $1,094,000, and that will be specifically addressed with the special education reserve fund that will be established. So this is how you will see it from the town meeting warrant. So you can see again from the slides previous, the increase for the school operating budget was the 4.9, but we've broken off what has been identified for special education, and that will be down in this new special education reserve fund. So the increase for the Hopkinton Public Schools, again, will be the 2.88% with the establishment of this new reserve fund.
All right, thank you, Susan. So we also wanted to talk to you a little bit about what keeps us up at night. And I think it's enrollment projections that is keeping us up at night. So it's no secret to you that perhaps over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've had well over 500 students join us, and it's projected that we could have up to 1,000 more on their way. So how did we determine that there could be maybe 1,000 more on their way? What the Hopkinton Public Schools did, we hired a professional demographer, and we actually had him come in twice, once pre-pandemic and once during the pandemic, to sort of help us understand whether or not the pandemic was going to have any kind of impact on enrollment projections. So some of the data that he used to help us out with this project, he looked at enrollment reports from 2009-10 through 2021. He looked at birth rate data in Hopkinton, and lots of times what people will do is they just look at cohort survival rates. And so this person, when he helped us out, Dr. Arthur Wagman, did a little bit more. And you'll see also that the MSBA has done the same thing for us. He looked at the number of housing permits that were granted annually from 2010 to 2020. He looked at new and proposed housing developments, information on the Hopkinton real estate market, and then he also considered the impacts of the pandemic. All right, so the numbers that you see up there now, those are Dr. Wagman's numbers, and those are cohort survival numbers only. And these are the numbers that we actually built the 2021-2022 budget on. So at the end of FY22, it was projected that we would have 3,998 students. Today in the Hopkinton Public Schools, we have 4,071. So we are operating 70 students above where we thought we would be in June of 2022. It's not unusual for us. We're always making these kinds of predictions. What Dr. Wagman also did for us was he looked at those numbers, including new housing. And so the new housing numbers tell us that the projection would be as high as 4,024. Again, we're at 4,071. But I think the interesting piece is where he puts us in 10 years. In 10 years, Dr. Wagman believes that the Hopkinton Public Schools will have an enrollment of 4,745. The MSBA did similar work for us, and so they do this work now as a part of building a new school. So when we went out we had our SOI with the Elmwood project, and we were invited into the pipeline. This is the kind of work that they do for us. Their prediction is that we would be at 4,975 in the year 3031. So you can see that we have somewhere between 700 and 900 kids, at least according to these projections, which our demographers will tell us it's like catching smoke. You can't be certain that that's exactly what you're going to have, but I think when you have two independent demographers using sort of the same criteria and you're coming up with these numbers, we have this reality in front of us that we've got to start building in Hopkinton to be able to accommodate the kids who are coming in. All right, and so you're probably saying, but haven't we already been building? And the answer to that is yes, we certainly have. In 15-16, our enrollment, according to the October SIMS, which is what we submit to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, we had 3,463 students. In October of 21, we had 4,006. We're up to 4,071. So that student increase is 543 kids between 15 and 22. If you take a look at what we've done in terms of building, in the process of building the Marathon School, we tapped the brakes and said, we need to put 4 more classrooms on. And we did that while in construction. Currently, we have another project out there to add another 4 stick-built classrooms onto the Marathon School. So it will be 8 classrooms larger than what we had originally intended. What's happening right now at Marathon is the art room has been converted to a classroom. The family resource center has been converted to a classroom. So the PE wellness room is converted to a classroom. So what we've done is we've started to rob classrooms, again, for general education classroom settings. And it's almost like center school revisited. So when we get these 4 new classrooms, we'll be able to take some of those spaces back. But remember that we're using some of them also for preschool. So last night, one of the questions was, will this sustain? And we're hoping that at Marathon, the answer to that is yes. It doesn't feel like Marathon is going to get enormously bigger. If we went back to those slides, you'd see that they are projecting to have about 600 K-1 students at the Marathon School, even as far out as 3031. So it's kind of bubbling right now, which is the good news. That said, we really have no way of predicting where we'll be in 10 years other than to have our demographers help us with that. At the Elmwood School, you know that we've added 4 modular classrooms. At the Hopkins School, we added 4 modular classrooms, and at the high school, we added 6 stick-built classrooms. And if you take a look at that number of 543, if you imagine that we were putting 20 students in each one of those classrooms, it would constitute a 27 classroom need. The numbers that you see on that slide indicate that we've accounted for 22 of those classrooms. So we are trying to keep pace, but it's very difficult to keep pace when the enrollment growth is just so rapid, which is why this keeps us up at night. All right, and I'll let Mrs. Rothermick talk about the Elmwood project because she really has been at the helm of this, and I do want to thank her for this and all of her work for town meeting.
So as the community knows, we have been invited into the MSBA pipeline for the Elmwood project. And this is a visual of how that process goes. Right now, currently, we are in the section of forming the project team. We have selected and awarded our owner's project manager, which is Compass, which is the same owner's project manager that we use to build the Marathon School. So our next step now is actually going out to bid for the designer. Then we would move into the feasibility and schematic design, which is really a 2-year process in looking at all the options for the Elmwood project and what does it mean, what does the community want out of this school, and then funding the project. So the Elmwood Building Committee, the ESBC2, will be studying many school options during the summer of '22, leading to the town meeting vote on a recommended solution either in the fall of '23 or the winter of '24. So in 2019, we had looked at all of our buildings, again, trying to address where we are with each of our buildings in terms of all of this growth. And one of the things that we had looked at was what could we do with the Elmwood project? Do we build an in-kind, a 2-3 school, or do we try to pull another grade into the Elmwood project, which would then create that cascading relief in our other buildings? So it gives us a longer term approach if we're able to pull a grade down into the Elmwood project. It also gives the benefit of that additional grade being funded through the MSBA, as opposed to the town continuing to add 4 classroom additions on every school, which is 100% borne by the community. So these are some of the options that we're looking at, and some of the ways that we'll look not just at the Elmwood project, but at long-term for all of our buildings. So there are a lot of factors that will be discussed over the next 2 years in terms of really defining what the community wants out of the Elmwood project. As I said before, the number of grades, do we look at just the same grade 2-3 configuration, or do we look at a grades 2, 3, and 4? The size of the school will be determined, the square footage, the site that will be selected in Hopkinton, what would be the site improvements required, what are our sustainability goals, what are the design materials, and many, many more. All of these will be discussed in depth with the building committee and also with the community. But the piece that we want to really bring to the community is what has happened with construction costs. And you'll see some of these requests at the town meeting in May, where projects that have gone out to bid now are not able to meet the requirements of where we are with our construction cost increase with our bids. So as through the pandemic, these costs continue to remain high. And so with the increases, the costs looking for the Elmwood project could be somewhere between 620 and 700 square feet compared to MSBA projects currently that are being built with around 574 to 695 square feet in 2021. So this could mean that the total project budget cost may range between 95 million and 160 million, depending on all these decisions that are made along the way. And of course, this is the total project budget. This is prior to the MSBA reimbursement, which could be north of 30%. So there are a lot of discussions that will happen with the community around what we want out of the Elmwood project.
Excellent. Thank you very much to both of you for your presentations. I promise I won't have any more kids. I promise. That'll be.
Thank you for doing your part.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Next, I'd like to welcome up Elaine Lazarus, Assistant Town Manager.
I'm going to talk about a few of the other things on the annual town meeting warrant, starting with the exciting topic of zoning. I know that for some people it isn't very exciting, but this year we have featured a lot of housekeeping items. And housekeeping is interesting and important because zoning provides certainty for land ownership and land development. And when it comes to our economic health, that's very important. So a couple of the articles involve consistency and references to plural and singular uses, which may seem like an esoteric thing, but it's really important to know what uses are allowed, how many are allowed, and where they're allowed. So that offers some clarity and some certainty for the future. Another one of those housekeeping changes is in the off-street parking section, where just cleans up the language and makes it more clear regarding parking spaces and their references to parking spaces, so that there's no change in interpretation of what things might mean. And part of the uncertainty with zoning is things that require interpretation by the zoning enforcement officer or boards as they're dealing with planning issues. And so we want to make things as clear as possible in the zoning bylaw, and that's part of what those articles would do. We have a couple of housekeeping articles regarding in the zoning bylaw and in the general bylaw to remove gender-specific references, so we go to gender-neutral references. This started with the change in the select board name a few years ago from Board of Selectmen to Select Board, and continuing that process of just going through and reviewing mostly our old bylaws and old references to bring them up to date. And that's very important for the community as well. One non-housekeeping article in zoning is an increase in the maximum gross floor area for the industrial district. And the gross floor area determines the maximum amount of square footage that can be built on a particular lot. And it's keyed to, in the gross floor area calculation, it's keyed to the size of the lot. So the smaller the lot, the less square footage you can build and so forth. So this would increase from 50% to 80%. And it allows for a larger volume of square footage to be built on the lot, but it doesn't change the dimensional requirements. So it's the same setbacks, the same height restrictions, but it allows for greater utilization of that industrially zoned property. And South Street, where the Industrial Aid District is located, is basically our employment engine for the community. And we're not gaining more commercial property. And so the efficient and greater usage of the land we have is important. And so that's what that change would enable. And the Zoning Advisory Committee and the Planning Board worked with chamber representatives on that initiative. And that's part of what's on the zoning docket for this year. Another item that Norman touched on was affordable housing and the creation of a revolving account to enable the town's participation in a multi-town shared housing services office. Right now, our affordable housing monitoring services and any other services that we need for affordable housing are provided by our current staff, our planning staff, myself, but it's on an as-needed or ad hoc basis. It's not something we devote a great amount of time to. And that's unfortunate because this is something that the community needs to dedicate more time and attention to, and we need to create more affordable units. So this shared housing services office, the town will be the lead community in what we hope will be an 8-town organization. Once everyone gets through their town meeting, we'll know who's going to be part of it. But right now it's 8 communities. Hopkinton will be the lead community, which means we manage the contract for the consultant that will be hired. And they will provide ongoing affordable housing services to our current residents, those who own ownership units, those who are in rental units and have questions, need to interact with the state on a lot of these issues, and that will provide better service delivery for the community in that respect, and give it more of the attention that it deserves. So that affordable account that will be created is the pass-through for the money coming from the other communities that go to the consultant. Another item that I wanted to just mention that there's been a lot of talk lately about trails and open space purchases, but one of the initiatives currently ongoing, not on the town meeting warrant, but our principal planner, John Gelsich, is working with open space groups on an update to the town's open space and recreation plan. And this is really important. We need to update that every 7 years to remain eligible for certain grants. And so all the things we've been talking about lately about connectivity, pedestrians, bicycles, open space, that all gets melded into this plan. So just putting out a plug there for that plan, which enables a lot of the programs and opportunities that residents take advantage of. And then thinking ahead to next year's annual town meeting, you may have heard that there was a recent change to the State Zoning Act that requires MBTA communities, of which Hopkinton is one, to create a multifamily housing district that allows multifamily units by right within a half mile of, in our case, is the Southborough train station. And at a density of 15 units per acre that's suitable for families. And we have to allow that if we want to be eligible for certain grants and funding. And one of those grants includes the MassWorks infrastructure program, which the town has taken advantage of and hopes to in the future. So that's coming for the next annual town meeting. We think the state is finalizing the guidelines on that, but this will have to be a really intense community involved initiative that's going to be starting work once we know what we have to do and when that timeline is. And with that, I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Elaine. And on that note, so town meeting is Monday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. at the High School Athletic Center. Really encouraging everyone at home to attend. Thank you very much. And thank you as well.